it's a phantom campaign, and a phantom presidency at this point.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Backstory. I'm your host and the creator of Backstory, Dana Lewis. In this edition, Trump's slump in the polls. It won't easily be won back. Voters have turned against him on his bungled, many say negligent handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. His promises to reopen the country haven't garnered public support, but rather fueled a lack of credibility and confidence. Overall, President Trump's approval ticked down from 49% in May and 39% in June to just 38% in July. Trump's campaign ads reminisce about a roaring economy before COVID-19. He says the pandemic could have been worse, although it's hard to imagine how.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
My administration will take all necessary steps to safeguard our citizens from this threat.
Hysterical xenophobia.
Be giving Americans a false sense.
Is it accurate that if these steps had not been put in place, it could have been 2 million people dead here in the United States?
Yes.
No matter how hard they try to stop us, they can't. We built the greatest economy the world has ever seen, and we're going to do it again.
Democratic rival Joe Biden promises a better federal response to the virus, more support for small business, supplies for healthcare workers, and more international cooperation.
The moment has come to deal with the denial of the promise of this nation, made to so many. Because if it weren't clear before, it's clear now. This country wasn't built by Wall Street bankers and CEOs. It was built by the great American middle class. Healthcare workers, docs, nurses, delivery truck drivers, grocery store workers. We've come up with a new phrase for them. Essential workers. We need to do more than praise them. We need to pay them. As president, it's my commitment to all of you to lead on these issues and to listen. For that's what the presidency is. The duty to care for all of us, not just those who vote for us, but all of us. This job is not about me. It's about you. It's about us. I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Overseas, Trump's America First has become America Alone. At home, his failure to bring the nation together after the murder of George Floyd appears to be grounded, some say, in racism. And now he is accused of subverting justice by commuting the 40-month jail sentence of Roger Stone, indicted in the investigation of Russian interference in the last election. Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren said it showed Mr. Trump was the most corrupt president in history. Some Republican critics of Trump have also spoken out, with Senator Mitt Romney describing the president's decision as unprecedented, historic corruption.
Moments ago, the president defending his decision to commute Roger Stone's sentence.
Roger Stone was treated horribly. Roger Stone was treated very unfairly. Roger Stone was brought into this witch hunt, this whole political witch hunt, and the Mueller scam. It's a scam because it's been proven false. And he was treated very unfairly. What I did, I will tell you this. People are extremely happy.
And he has lost important voter support in key states as working women, above all, have jumped ship. The Republicans who think Trump will save them are on a sinking ship, say pollsters. And this is not in any way similar to the polls in 2016, which gave Hillary Clinton an edge.
Dr. Stanley Greenberg is a pollster who worked for Bill Clinton, Al Gore, Tony Blair, Nelson Mandela, and he's the author of a book, Rest in Peace, the GOP, How the New America is Dooming Republicans. Dr. Greenberg, welcome to Backstory.
Delighted. Thank you for having me.
I should say I reached out to you because of your article in The Atlantic, and I thought it was a brilliant insight. I mean, in essentially, you're saying this isn't Hillary Clinton's polling. What are the latest polls? And Biden at this point has a sizable lead.
Look, the kind of half the argument is polling has changed. First of all, polling wasn't that wrong nationally in 2016. It was wrong in the states, where the state polling really missed it, but not the national number. But also, there was a huge underrepresentation of white working class voters in the polling in 2016. That missed the fact that there was like all of these, new working class voters coming in to support Trump. But my polls have 10% more white working class voters than they did in 2016, just to reflect the real the real population of the country.
Right, obviously,
that's the first part of it. That's the first part of it. The other part of it is it just misses the fact that the country has been in revolt against Trump, and which is why the poll numbers are so big. The reason why Biden has such a big lead, is that from day one we've had the Women's March, we had the pushback against the president on immigration, the Muslim ban, against him amongst college-educated, women, the intolerance, and then now kind of millennial and Gen Z revolt against him on race. And the country has turned against him and is fighting against him on everything that this kind of nativist vision of America.
Is Trump a racist?
Yes. Yes. There's no why should one hesitate in saying it? I mean, he, at every point he has sent off, racist signals, whether it was about, not knowing the David Duke, the head of the KKK in the campaign, the good people on both sides in Charlottesville, and now what he's doing. Yes.
He's done tweets against NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace, against Black Lives Matter,
as well. And if we go back to it, his earlier period where he advertised in the I believe New York Times, about the Central Park, murder there, calling for their conviction. And
that's going back a long way, but I mean the most recent ones, obviously after the murder of George Floyd, is he tapping into a part of America that'll get him reelected? I mean, is there something I don't understand, or is this? Is he tapping into a demographic there, or is this a motive racist Trump?
Not even close. Trump's election, has led Americans and led everybody in the world to question America that they had a huge faith in its exceptionalism. On so many issues, on race, on above all, on immigration. Being an immigrant country was almost the defining element of America. It grew as it elected Barack Obama, president of the United States twice. And it looks like a very different country from the rest of the world, quite exceptional. His election just produced huge doubts about America amongst Americans. Who wonder every day, what do we really, believe, and it's still, you still have to say, well, if 38% still approve of how he's doing in office, isn't that unacceptable?
But that's kind of this argument of the two Americas.
Yeah, right. What you have to understand is that the Republican Party has been in a decade-long battle led by the Tea Party to stop Barack Obama, a black president, first black president, from governing, as well as his coalition, his diverse coalition, which also included, millennials, and unmarried women, but a diverse coalition to block that coalition from governing. And they basically stopped everything and polarized everything for a decade. But the base of that was the Tea Party within the Tea Party revolt, the Tea Party within the Republican Party. They ultimately took over the Republican Party. They stopped the GOP establishment from governing. It was an internal battle, and Donald Trump ended up leading that faction of the Republican Party, but he has huge support with the evangelicals, and Tea Party, and mostly with the Catholic Republicans. But he's driven out everybody else. And so, he has an approval rating, but it is grounded in a diminished party that's losing support, that's shedding supporters.
Let's talk the polls and demographics for a minute, because you were an advisor to Hillary Clinton's campaign, and you thought that she was going to win. So what is different about it this time? Why do you feel more assured that Biden's got it?
Right. I was somebody who they welcomed input. I wasn't in the room amongst the decision makers, but they did welcome input.
Sometimes it's easier to get real input if you're not in the room, if you're not part of the gang, right?
Right. But I did communicate with her and Podesta and Robbie Mook and the others who were at the main speechwriters, of the campaign. No, it was a very arrogant campaign, that they didn't listen to voters, stopped doing polling. I didn't know that. So that when I heard from the campaign, that they were, that their polling was fine in the Midwest, I hadn't realized they had stopped polling, had not done any polling in those states or nationally for the last 3 weeks of the campaign. They had
Why was that important, especially in the Midwest?
Well, look, the way campaigns are run in America, this is not a proportional system. You have to win each state, and it's a winner-take-all system. So you need to win Michigan, you need to win Pennsylvania, you need to win Wisconsin, and so if you're running a real campaign, so when I'm doing polling, for example, for the Gore campaign, you have a pollster and a campaign in each state. And where are we there? What do we have to do, to win that state and get the electoral college majority? So if you don't have a campaign, which they didn't do any advertising. She never went to Wisconsin and do any polling in a state that they had to win. It's mad. It's malpractice. Similarly in Michigan, they spent more money in trying to pick up an electoral college seat, I think, in Nebraska or Kansas, rather than be sure of winning Michigan. And
you said one of her gaffes was to describe half of Trump's supporters as deplorables. Right. And you walked right into what you've termed a white working class revolt against the elites. I mean, why did they revolt in last election and they won't this time?
Look, I think it's actually the most important piece of what about the polling. Obviously, I talked about that earlier, but it's also the most important piece of what was happening in 2016. And there you were looking at a working class revolt that we saw in Britain, with the what happened in the referendum on Brexit, and we saw with Donald Trump, and you saw a working class that in the post-financial crisis had really been crushed. No one had cared very much about their loss of wealth and income and jobs and their political marginalization in that period. And Trump, Brexit in Britain, but Trump in the U.S. Really captured that, galvanized that.
Why won't he again?
And there was and there, if you look in the primaries and the general, there was like steady increased registration of white working class voters to come in and vote for Trump. So they came in excess, to produce that result. But we've had the opposite. Every trend has moved in the opposite direction. She didn't campaign with white working class voters. She thought when she lost badly to them in Michigan, she thought she couldn't win them. And she simply decided to compensate by winning the big cities with bigger numbers and minority voters and women voters, all the voters that were Donald Trump was offending. And she very much ran on identity politics. She didn't go to the rural areas, didn't go to working class communities. Real sense of disrespect.
But bring me up to date on Biden. How is
Biden on the other hand? Biden, in his bones, comes out of that respect for working people. That's Biden's whole identity, and it's impossible to imagine that he would run in that in that way. He'll respect working people, but also Trump lost these voters. If you look at the midterm elections, what I argue in another Atlantic piece is that the other reason why people don't understand Trump and his weakness is the working class is invisible to them. They focus on women, they focus on college educated and elite voters. So if you look at the 2018 midterms, all the focus was on suburban women, the seats that Democrats picked up in the House. But the shift from the white working class was 3 times as big to the Democrats as it was in the suburbs. It didn't produce as many seats because they're dealing statewide, kind of affecting statewide races, and the suburban seats were on the edge of being picked up. The trend had been there, but the big revolt against Trump took place in 2018 with the white working class. But since they're invisible to the elites, they don't see the working class. They just can't believe. I also can't believe they won't be fooled again. They look at the Trump rallies and they think those, that's the white working class. But what they miss is that they pulled off him dramatically already. And that also.
Why is that? I mean, because is it because of his positions on race, his positions on immigration, or is it because they're not
COVID-19 because they're not fools? Because they're not fools. Donald Trump came in, and office. He promised them affordable health care. We're going to get this health care. I'm going to give you tremendous replacement. I'll never touch Social Security and Medicare. He came in and repealed, tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act without any replacement. Tried to cut Medicare, and Medicaid, and they were most betrayed by that because they were dealing in real time with these huge costs of healthcare. And they only saw prescription drug costs, skyrocket under his. Instead, he cut taxes for the rich and governed for the big corporations and the rich. So that they think they were, fooled by him. But that happened early. But elites have been unable to see Trump's weakness because the working class was invisible to them.
Much more devastating to Trump's prospects is waning support from women who form the majority of white working class. So
yes.
You've made that.
Yeah.
But we're also seeing just from the Republican foundation a deterioration in support within the Republican Party, right? I mean, the people who identify as Republicans, you quoted a figure from 39% down to 36% before George Floyd's death, and now it's down to 33% from 39%. Why are Republicans leaving the party?
Well, I mean, he's basically driven out the biggest shift is like moderate, pro-choice Republican women, more college educated, and they've been pushed out. They've been dropped like about 10% less as a proportion of the party. So that now he's stronger with the remaining bloc, but he's moved out. But he's pushed out the biggest shift. Was these moderate Republican women, but you've also now begun to see a shift of the McCain Republicans, who are more conservative, and more pro-life, but they've been pushed out too, not quite as big numbers. And in our latest research, we've also shown a pullback from many observing Catholics. So he's left with the Tea Party and evangelicals as solid, and they'll rally to him. They won't come to his rally apparently if it's not healthy enough. But it's a paper. It's a phantom campaign. The phantom presidency at this point. I describe in the piece that he's kind of a pop gun that he calls out to his supporters. Come. It's Magonite. At the White House, come. Protect. The White House. Or liberate. Wisconsin or Michigan and Virginia. Nothing's happened. People don't watch the fact that he's making these calls for these voters, his Tea Party voters, to come back him. Some come with assault weapons. It's intimidating, but it's not real. It doesn't. You have 24 million people that may have participated in these protests. It's a huge event that's happened with him having this very weak level of support, even at the kind of anti-political white nationalist bloc he's brought out before.
So if you were to talk about risks between now and November, and that's a long time in an election campaign, who has the biggest margin of risk, do you think? And you make that point in some of the things you've written, that it's probably more Trump is the one who can step in it rather than Biden.
Right. Right. So, I say, first of all, my view is, because I thought Hillary was going to win, I still wanted her to win big because I wanted her also to win the Congress, and the Senate, as well, because the Senate is so hard, and it's so biased in favor of rural areas and rural states, that it was, critical to try to pick up those Senate seats. So I thought she was going to win. That didn't mean, you didn't do everything possible to get the biggest possible win, against Trump. And they didn't do that. They took for granted they were going to win. And I think the same thing is true here, that you assume that you could lose this. You have to have the biggest possible margin, because we have to have a big Senate win and really have a real control of the federal government when this is over. But there's always uncertainty. What's the uncertainty that's out there? The Democrats are divided. When you see the issues of police, defunding the police, monuments, I would imagine Democrats are divided on where you go with those issues.
Repeatedly, Trump is twittering on that, saying law and order. So he obviously sees a chink in the armor.
Right. It's a chink, but but you have the other things that are playing out. You have an economy with double-digit unemployment highs since the Great Depression. With the more states not opening up. Are you going to have this big, prolonged, double-digit unemployment coming into the election, or is the economy going to take off? I mean, which he's banking and talking about. A third quarter that's surging growth. I think it's more likely that's going to stagnate, and that's what I've seen out of most of the reports of what might be coming. Is it's more likely stagnation. What about the virus? Do we think in 3 months the country is going to be struggling to control it, or do we think it's going to have conquered it and people want to reward and applaud the president for success in dealing with it? Right now, he's saying you have to go back to the school. It has to be in the school buildings themselves. That's a requirement from the federal government. Betsy Vos has declared that it has to be 5 days a week. In the buildings. It's not going to happen, and parents are extremely nervous. So in every area that you're dealing with, it's more likely. Will Biden say something that's insensitive or not, out of touch with what's happening in this country? Or as I said in the piece, will Donald Trump, say something that supports the white nationalists and bring out, alienate the country from him, as he's been doing over and over again. So yes, there's uncertainty, but I think most of the risk is on the Trump side. And almost everything you look at, to me, has greater risk, for Trump. And the piece I would add in this is the Chief Justice Roberts, who has made 3 very surprising decisions. And he's had some say on when these decisions were made, because I think he was sending a signal to the president. This is not 2000 when Al Gore, was not allowed to become president despite winning the popular vote and probably the Electoral College. We're not going to overturn a real election. What I believe that this is not a Trump court, is what I think Roberts was saying. And that's, again, a huge risk for the president.
You think he'll go? Last question. Will Trump go if the numbers are close? I understand that's not a pollster's insight. Right. That's more an American just watching the way this goes. Yeah. I mean, do you fear?
I think he will do everything possible. Not to go. But it's a federal system in which the elections are certified in the states, and if you don't certify an election in the states, you also don't certify the state officials. So it's a little more complicated. If you say this election was fraud, then Ohio senators or state legislators don't get seated either. If you've tried to throw out the election, in key states based on fraud, from high mail-in ballots. I've been impressed. If you look at the Secretary of State, you look at Kentucky, the election just happened there with a Republican Secretary of State. look at what happened when he tried to have a commission to investigate the 2016 election to show that it was his election was a result of illegal immigrants voting, but Republican secretaries of state declined to send the voter sheets in order, because that would, if he threw out his election, he also threw out their election.
You're saying not likely. He
not likely.
He may whimper and whine if he didn't get.
It's more complicated. It's more complicated.
Dr.
And I'm also not sure, that a lot of Republicans don't really want him out. Don't want to see another Trump term.
Well, clearly,
I would not assume.
Many Republicans have voiced discomfort with Trump's views, certainly on the racist issues in America. So, Dr. Stanley Greenberg, great to talk to you, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for doing this.
Michael Shure is a senior national correspondent. He's appeared on election shows, great political insight and commentary. Welcome to Backstory, Michael.
It's great to be here. I'm a listener, Dana, so I'm glad to be here.
Well, and I appreciate that because we practically talk every day in another program called Quick Hit, so Michael has to be nice to me.
That's true. Although I don't, because we know each other. I can just go after you.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to ask you really tough questions. Listen, I've just listened to pollster Stanley Greenberg. I mean, terrific analysis, and he says Biden has it. What do you think? Does Trump still have a surprise?
I don't see where he surprises. You look at the election map, I just don't see how it's happening. And I'm going to be honest, I was somebody who didn't think he would win last time. I'm in a huge majority of people that covered the thing. I was on the road with Donald Trump for about a year and a half, covering that election, going to those rallies, and I was with Clinton a little bit. I didn't think there was a chance. There's something, you're a hockey fan, Dana. When you go to a hockey game, they say that everyone who cares about it is at the arena, which is why nobody watches it on television. Well, I sort of had the feeling there that everyone who cared about Donald Trump was at the venue, and I was certainly wrong about that. But what I don't think exists this time, and Stan Greenberg has a lot of information, which I think is really valuable to this conversation, but I also don't think in Joe Biden you have the same kind of candidate. As a matter of fact, I know that, as you did with Hillary Clinton. I think people really underestimated the negativity with which Democrats held Hillary Clinton. I also didn't think that they thought that a woman would vote for Donald Trump, and with all that we knew about him, and with the fact that you had a woman on as the nominee for the first time. So there's so much that was at play there that we all got wrong.
And she also, by the way, being a hockey fan, I've been saying the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to win, every year since 1967, and they still haven't got a Stanley Cup. So I'm not going to call this election. But with Hillary Clinton, do you think that, she really had the perception of appealing to the elites and not the working class, especially working class white women?
Yeah, and Stan Greenberg points that out. The deplorables line, which we all sort of thought, first of all, a lot of people agreed with, but they thought it was bad politics. We didn't realize, I don't think, the wedge that it put between Hillary Clinton, her supporters, and Donald Trump supporters. She walked into a trap with it, and that trap really energized a lot of people in the states that Donald Trump won by very little. You talk about Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, those Rust Belt states, those manufacturing states where there is a real white middle class, and that white middle class is not moved by unions in the way they once were. They're people that will look at the candidate, and Donald Trump saying, throw the bums out, drain the swamp, that appealed to a lot of them, men and women alike.
So if they were not offended by some of the things that he did and, his statements and tapes leaked talking of grabbing women in areas that he shouldn't have, why did women stick with him then? And why do you think that they won't now?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding as to the second part of that question. So I'm going to do what I can't stand when people do when I interview them, is answer the second part first. But I think the fact that you saw in 2018 so many women, suburban white women, going toward the Democrats, I think that is more indicative in 2018 than what we saw in 2016, which is them trying out something else. And also, again, we have to point to the sort of visceral dislike that many women women had as well of Hillary Clinton. And then when you go to the first part of what you were asking, I think that this year is different because we've had 4 years or 3 years now, 3.5 years of Donald Trump as president. And that's different than Donald Trump as a candidate. We know how he governs. We know what the country's been like for 3.5 years. That affects women. And I think a lot of the issues that play to women, issues of empathy, issues of family, issues of jobs and taxes that affect everyone. But you look at, I think, immigration. Immigration was an issue that divided the country. Right now, we are a pro-immigrant country. And when you see the kids in cages on the border, that changed a lot of women votes in 2018.
If I can jump in there, because, I mean, he keeps tweeting law and order, law and order. Is he strategically, demographically adrift, or does he see something that we don't, that there's going to be increasing fear and consternation among people as Black Lives Matter say defund the police, and he thinks he's going to win it maybe on a law and order platform?
I think what he's doing, I would never advise somebody who won the presidency about how to win the presidency. I don't think he's doing it right this time. I don't think his base for the most part is going anywhere. But as a president who has low approval numbers, he has to win over other people, not just geographically, but demographically. And I don't think he's doing it. So law and order, yeah, that gets his people riled up. He can't do the rallies, so he has his mini rallies on Twitter. When he talks about defunding the police and what that would mean, he's telling that to people who want to hear that. But he has to now reach across and find people like he did last time, these white women voters, for example, that Stanley Greenberg writes about and that you talked about, Dana. He's got to get those people to come to him or come back to him. It's tough to do that in just a little bit of time now.
Greenberg made an interesting point in the article that he wrote for The Atlantic, and then also in the interview that I did with him. And I said, what can go wrong, which is just about anything in, months to come between now and November. And he said, yeah, but a lot more given Trump's record can go wrong on his side than on Biden's side. Would you agree that the odds just are that Trump will put his foot in it many times versus, Joe Biden?
Yeah, and that starts with the presumption of a negative. Donald Trump needs something to go right, and it's very difficult to find things that can go right for Donald Trump, as well as to find things that don't go wrong. And so I think you have to look at both of those pictures in that conversation. Joe Biden is really sort of as Democrats thought for a long time, and as Biden argued during the primaries, the perfect candidate here because he can win in the places that Donald Trump won, where Democrats ordinarily do win. And I think it's proving that way, at least in the polls. And one thing on the polls, and I know Stan Greenberg has talked about this, and he talked about it in his article, and I'm sure with you, Dana. Stan Greenberg is talking about how pollsters got it wrong in 2016. Well, like anybody, this is not just one continuum of polling. If the Yankees lose the World Series when they're supposed to win the World Series, well, over the winter, they're going to get rid of the second baseman. They're going to change some coaches. They're going to change the batting order, bring in a new pitcher, what have you. The same thing has to happen with polling. So pollsters have adjusted the way they do their polling. They're much more confident in their numbers now, knowing what they did because of 2016.
Okay, last question, because we read it not with amusement, but with horror from afar across the Atlantic. A lot of press and a lot of articles have been written, will Trump go if he loses? And Michael Cohen, which I didn't realize until I read in again today, suggested Trump won't leave. In his congressional testimony before heading off to prison, Trump's former attorney said, given my experience working for Trump, I fear that if he loses the election in 2020, there will never be a peaceful transition of power. That's pretty jarring stuff.
It is jarring stuff. I mean, if Joe Biden wins, just to imagine Joe Biden, as we saw Donald Trump and Barack Obama climb into the limousine to go to the inauguration as is customary. Do I think it will be in the way that we've seen that transition in power? I don't know. I don't think so, and I see reason for it. But there are a lot of people that are not Donald Trump that if they find that his brand loses, there are a lot of Republicans that are going to say, Mr. President, you have to do this. And if you don't, you're going to be hurting the party and the country for a long time. So it's not just Donald Trump making this argument in a bottle, in a vacuum. I think it's going to be other people that persuade him that it has to be done in a certain way.
Michael, I'll see you on Quick Hit. Thanks so much.
Okay. Thanks.
Overseas, Trump is viewed by most leaders as chaotic, unpredictable, and an unprincipled leader. In our previous podcast, Russia's Shadow State, a strong case is made to indicate he's under Russian influence, compromised, and dangerous to NATO unity. Many will cheer a Trump election defeat this November, most of the applause not from America's enemies but its closest allies. I'm Dana Lewis. Thanks for listening to Backstory. Subscribe and share, and I'll talk to you soon.